Some years ago, there was a widow in South Africa. Her husband had died, leaving her to raise their 8 young children all by herself. No easy feat, especially considering the fact that she was poor, and especially considering the fact that she was black, living in South Africa at a time when the apartheid system meant that blacks had virtually no legal protection. But after working long and hard for some time, she had saved up enough money to buy 400 bricks. Enough bricks, she figured, to be able to fix up the run-down, dilapidated little house that she and her children lived in. But when the truck pulled up to deliver the bricks, the man unloaded only 250. So right away, she asked when she would be receiving the rest of the bricks. After all, she had already paid for 400 bricks. But the man told her that those 250 bricks were all that he was going to give her. The woman stared at him and said, "I will never forget this. But that's okay. You don't have to worry about those bricks. The God I believe in is the protector of the widow and the fatherless. And someday you are going to know that." 2 weeks later, that same man pulled up in front of that widow's house and unloaded the other 150 bricks. "What are you doing?" the widow asked. The man explained that 2 other houses that he had been working on had suddenly burned to the ground. And he was fearful that maybe God had something to do with it. As far as that man was concerned, God really was with that widow, even though maybe he had not thought so at first. Our God, the God of the Bible, is a God who does care for those who are widows. Our God, the God of the Bible, is a God who cares for the poor and the powerless. For instance, in the New Testament, 1 out of every 16 verses you find there speaks about the poor and our need to treat the poor fairly and justly. In the Gospel of Luke, 1 out of every 7 verses speaks about the responsibilities that we have toward those who are in need. And likewise, here in the prophet Amos, we find that a deep concern for the poor and the powerless is at the very heart of who God is. You see, during Amos's day, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. It was the best of times because during Amos's day, the nations around Israel that had often harassed them in the past were leaving Israel alone, and they were enjoying a time of peace. And because of that, the economy in Israel was booming. Business was doing just wonderful. But during Amos's time, it was also the worst of times. It was the worst of times because while the economy in Israel was humming right along, it became more and more common for the rich and the powerful to take advantage of the poor and the powerless. According to Amos, the rich business owners had it in for the poor working stiffs at virtually every turn. When the rich business owners went to sell things like vegetables, they used undersized bushel baskets, so that when the poor people went to buy, say, a bushel they ended up getting shortchanged. And then when the poor people went to sell their crops to the rich business owners for their grocery stores, the business owners used false weights on their scales. The weights that were labeled maybe 10 pounds actually weighed 15 pounds. And so when the poor farmers put their crops on the scale to be weighed, and they were thinking that they were selling 10 pounds of corn, they were actually selling 15 pounds, but only getting paid for 10. And as all that was going on, people were becoming more and more obsessed with money, and were focusing less and less on God. Amos says that it was getting so bad that when the Sabbath, the weekly day of rest, came around, or when the monthly religious holidays came around, the rich business owners just went through the motions of those religious observances, because what they most cared about was for the Sabbath or the religious holidays to come to an end so that they could open their stores again and make even more money for themselves. I don't know. Do you think there's any parallel between what was happening back in Amos's day, some 700 years before Jesus, and what's going on in our society today? Back in Amos's time, it was all about money, money, money. Back in Amos's time, it was all about greed, greed, greed. Back in Amos's day, fewer and fewer people really seemed to care about God. I don't know. Do you see a parallel? Several years ago, a husband and wife went on vacation in southern Mexico to the city of Oaxaca. One warm afternoon, they decided to take a break from their sightseeing and took a table at an outside cafe. They noticed that a couple of tables away from them was another American couple. At one point, the man at that table motioned for the children in the town square to come over to his table. When the children came over, right away it was obvious that the children were poor and malnourished. And they had been in the town square trying to sell bubble gum and small souvenirs in order to try to raise money for their impoverished families. The American tourist at that other table made this offer to the children. He told them that he would give them so many pesos for every lap they ran around the town square. And so off the children raced. Even though it was a very hot, very humid day, those children raced around that town square as quick as they could, with sweat pouring from their faces. And all the time, that tourist kept laughing at them and mocking them at them and yelling to run faster